The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening and hello everybody. Welcome to Topic 4, Week 4, our final and most fascinating of our live webinars for the Agile Short Course. Now, a couple of things to talk about before we get into things tonight. First of all, thanks everyone for continuing to join in and be a part of all this. It's been very exciting for us to run and deliver all of this, and hence we put this fascinating poll up to get a little bit of feedback from you all to find out how well we might have hit the mark with what we've provided. And I'll just, thanks everyone for answering these and all the polls, by the way. It's very useful to us, and hopefully it helps you pass the time as you wait for everything to kick off before we start. So let me just close that and just share it for everybody to see what we got. So we've obviously got quite a few people that find it fairly valuable, which is fantastic news and feedback to us. Now, just whilst we're talking about the idea of feedback, most of you should at some point after the course is finished, you'll get an email asking you to do a little bit of a survey or give us some feedback or some sort of evaluation. Please do, if you can spare the few minutes necessary. We would love to get a more broad base of feedback to a broader range of questions. So that'll be something we'd certainly value if you have the time to do that for us when the time comes. So, Topic 4, let's kick off with a few things. First of all, we are going to cover the admin things tonight. Let me just launch the presentation first of all. Now, the housekeeping items. We'll be brief on these because most of you are veterans, you're already familiar with all this. Of course, do use the questions box in the portal if you have any questions. Now, just in regards to questions and answers, we did put up a combined presentation of unanswered questions out of the week 2. Lots of people downloaded that and appeared to have got some use out of it, so hopefully that hopefully it met expectations, but we haven't done that for week 3 yet. We're going to combine that with week 3 and week 4. So again, put your questions in there. We will have time for questions today. If we don't get to them, then we'll definitely put them in a combined week 3, week 4 question presentation in the next few days. So keep an eye out for that on the portal. That's where you'll find it. Of course, most of you would have accessed the portal by now, where you've been able to get your pre-recorded lectures, the webinar recordings. Lots of people are still accessing those pre-recorded lectures and some of the previous ones as well. So if you haven't had time to listen to them all, you can still download them, tuck them away for future reference in case you need to check back on them at any point. I do want to talk about the online test that's coming up. Obviously, there is the final exam. Just to give you a bit of notice, there will be the test done via the portal that you've been accessing all along for all the recordings. There will be an entry at the very bottom underneath Topic 4 that will talk about the Week 5 online test. There will be a link there that will appear, and there'll be some instructions there as to how you go about accessing that. It'll be available roughly 1 week from now. So when we would normally be having our webinar, from that point on is when you'd find the test available. It might even be accessible a little bit early next week, but it'll certainly be available next week. You'll have a week where it'll be available to you. So during that week, you will be able to initiate the test at any time that you like. Once you've initiated it, a timer will begin, and you'll then need to complete the test before that timer expires. If for whatever reason you log off, go and do something else, pat the dog or something, and come back to it, the timer will continue. So if you log off, the timer doesn't stop. So don't start it until you've got enough time to complete it in one sitting. Everyone will only get one attempt for the purposes of their grade or their certificate, and everyone that passes obviously will receive the digital certificate. But after that has been done, after that week, we will then unlock the test for multiple retries, and anyone who wants to is welcome to have additional retries to test any answers that they might have gotten wrong. So hopefully that's something. There will be more information about that test will be provided in the link on the portal as soon as it's available. So have a look there for more information, and if there are any burning questions, by all means stick them up on the forums in the portal, and we'll be able to answer it for you. Now, of course, the links are up on the portal for further information about IT Masters, for further information about the other courses and things that can be studied with regards to the Project Management Masters and other courses, etc. Now, in regards to that, there have been some questions and some requests about putting some specific things into our discussion tonight, and we did get a few requests for people wanting to see a bit more in the way of case studies, specific examples, of different methodologies in play, etc. With regards to that, I have some exciting good news and of course a little bit of not so good news. We won't be able to squeeze that sort of thing into our discussion tonight. However, we are running a second massive open course. Just like this one, it will be the same duration. It will be 4 weeks. It will be free. It will be done online. It will be all the same, except it will be specifically regarding Scrum and Lean. So it will begin mid-October. Somewhere perhaps around the 17th, but thereabouts, so you'll get more information on that. There is a link that you can go to already. So and I think Alex might be able to squeeze that link into the answer box for you, into the text, so you'll be able to cut and paste that into your browser and access it directly. So we're going to have another MOOC coming up that'll focus on the difference between Scrum and Lean. We will look at each of these methodologies in a bit more detail, and we will make direct comparisons and analysis of which methodology would be appropriate in what situation. And we will give practical examples and case studies about how they look, how they work, etc. So this is where you're going to find more practical detail, and because of the fact that we've got this MOOC coming up, we're not really able to squeeze that sort of content into this particular high-level Agile content. So hopefully that gives you enough encouragement to join in for the next one, and a bit of an explanation as to why we haven't been able to make too many changes to what we're doing today. It's still going to be run by us, IT Masters, Charles Sturt University, and myself as the subject mentor. So it'll be all the things you're familiar with. It'll be the same methodology, etc. that we delivered. There's the link, but I know that's a picture. So you'll be able to get it. We'll actually, I think the link is already up on the portal. For those of you who are wanting to click it directly off the portal, it should be already there. So you should be able to link directly off that. Now the details, I've got some questions coming in about the test. The details about the test of exactly how many questions and exactly how long will be put up there within the next day. You'll see that on the portal. I believe it's only about an hour or so that you'll need. So it's not a very long test. So there's only going to be a few dozen questions, so you're not going to get hundreds of questions, and there'll be multiple choice. There won't be any typing necessary. You won't have to write and explain your answers. There'll be only multiple choice questions. Hopefully there'll be good questions, hopefully there'll be challenging questions, and hopefully there'll also be, you will get to find out exactly which ones you get wrong. There will be answers provided, so you'll be, when the answers are released, you'll be able to have a look at those and see where you went wrong and where and how you want to improve. If you want to redo and reset the test without seeing the answers, you can do that, but that's up to you. You can do it either way once it's all released, but that won't be available until that 1 week window has been closed and we've received everyone's entry or everyone's attempt, everyone who's going to. So if you don't do the test within that week, then you'll miss the opportunity for an official grade and an official certificate. So you need to do that within that time period. So we haven't yet fixed the exact start and timing for the webinars for the Agile course. It will be a similar time to this, but the exact time is yet to be confirmed. It may be a fraction earlier, but there is when you go to that link, pre-register just like you did for this course, and you'll be on the list, and then you'll get access to the portal once it's available, and all that information will be visible on the portal, so you'll be able to find out from there. So, let me just ask Alex first of all, do we have any admin questions about anything that I've just covered, Alex, that we need to answer before we start getting into the content? Anyone giving us any important admin questions worth covering?
There are a few questions about the test, but I think you've covered most of them, apart from how long the test will go for.
Okay, so I believe it's an hour plus, as in there'll be an hour plus a little bit of time for navigation, as in because it's an online test and there's internet speed and browser speed, etc. There's a few minutes always added to account for the need to browse your way through it. So it'll be that sort of time period, and a little over an hour is what I'm suspecting. And there'll be somewhere in the order of, I think it's around about 40 or 50 questions in that time period. So you will have more than a minute per question in each case. Obviously, it's open book because you'll be having access to whatever notes and materials that you have. Although it's a little challenging to do open book when it's all recorded. But that'll depend upon your notes, obviously. And the pass mark is 50%, for those that want to know what the pass mark is. If you get more than 50%, you'll get your certificate. So that's what you need to aim for. All right, thanks, Alex. Well, let's get into our discussion tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the ways in which or the things we need to think about in implementing Agile. And we have broken this up into 3 different areas. And the beginning of this discussion talks a fair bit about what we can effectively call the Agile life cycle. And this is a sequence that we look at, that we go through at a strategic level, at a high level, that maps out the major steps that are involved in an Agile project. And some of them are fairly different and fairly unique to the Agile mindset, and very different from plan-based thinking and plan-based projects. So the steps here, and they are in an order, we look at envision, speculate, explore, adapt, and close. Now, the important thing to note is that the 3 in the middle, speculate, explore, and adapt, these are the iteration steps. So we need to look at them a little bit differently, because these are the ones that repeat through each iteration. And we talk about our iterations as being the sprint, if you like, from a Scrum point of view. And they're the short period of usually a number of weeks, not too many. And this is where everything repeats. And this is what gets repeated: the speculate, explore, and adapt. And we'll dig into that in a little bit more detail as we go through it. But essentially, envision is a fairly crucial stage. And this is where I think I've seen a lot of Agile projects go wrong. Envisioning is a link. It's a connection point between the strategic objectives of the project and the practical objectives of the project. So this is where we try to marry up the often competing requirements of saying, we want to know exactly what's going on, what this project's going to do, how it's going to do it, what's going to come out at the end of it, and is it going to be worth it? And inside the project, we're saying, well, we want maximum flexibility to do it our way, however the innovation comes, whatever the people think is necessary, and whatever the client wants, and they can change their mind along the way. And these two things not only seem in conflict, they usually are in conflict to a certain extent. And the first point that we try and bring them together is the envision phase. Now, envisioning is where we really try to kick off the process, but it's important to understand what it is we're trying to kick off. Let's look at it at a higher, more philosophical level. We're not just talking about a project. Take a step back and look at what are the projects meant to do in an organizational context. What does a project do for an organization? And essentially, projects are something that a business does. They are a tool that the business uses, or that the organization uses, to accomplish certain things. Generally, they are about changing something. And if it's an internal project that's changing something within the organization, then the change for the organization is fairly obvious. It might be the change of their own CRM system as a software package. It might be the change of some other major functional component of the business. But it might also be the creation of a new product that that business is then going to take to market. And that represents a change, because creating a new product, going into a new market, or going into a new product space is always change within the organization. And these sorts of changes are typically happening all the time. So when the business looks at a project and says the project is a tool for us to accomplish these kinds of outcomes, the business is looking for certain information to come back before they can happily embark upon any kind of project, regardless of which methodology it might be used. And an important part of the envision phase is to meet those requirements and make sure that we're able to give back to the business the right information for them to make, at the executive level, good decisions about what is going to happen within this project, and as a result of this project, what's going to come out of it at the other end. So this makes the envision process a bit of a dual function. It is a business activity as well as being a project function. So it's a bit tempting to think of the envision phase to focus entirely about the thing we're going to change, the product or the innovation or the idea or the outcome. And yes, in talking about the envision phase, we talk a lot about how we're going to create this thing and what is it we're going to create and what's it going to do. But in the same breath, we need to talk about how this is going to change the organization that's paying for it. Now, sometimes we're looking at an internal customer, in which case a lot of the decision makers, for being from the customer perspective, saying, well, is the outcome of this project going to be worthwhile, are the same people that are investing in the project team or managing the decisions for the project team. And this can make it in some ways easier, but in some ways more difficult to clearly articulate what's going to come out of this project and is it worth it. When you're looking at an external customer, you're typically looking at it on a purely commercial basis. And the internal decision is looking at it from a cost perspective only. And the reward is simply the revenue that's going to come from whatever product is being created or from whatever the customer is going to pay for whatever it is this project will produce. So those equations are often a little more simplistic. But you might think it's a little more obvious for an internal customer to say, well, this is obviously worth it because here's the great benefit and it's not going to cost very much. It's usually the other way around. So this is why a lot of organizations like to compartmentalize their teams and their departments. And they try to say, well, let's make this a financial thing. Let's make this other department, for example, the sales department that wants the new CRM system. Let's make them a customer, an internal customer. But let's think of them as a customer. But the envision phase is not just talking about the dollars and cents. It's talking about the outcomes and the effects or consequences that will come out of this project. It's not about defining the specifics of the project. It's about contextually understanding the impact of that project. So, for example, if we're talking about introducing a new CRM system into a sales department, we're not just talking about how many users, how many seats, how much data. Those are the details and the specifics. We're talking about how is this expected to help them sell? How is this expected to help them with customer retention? How might this help them manage their customer debt level, customer satisfaction? How might this help them with their cash flow forecasting with a CRM sales system that helps them predict customer expenditure? These are the impacts that come out of this project. And when we define the vision of a project, this is what we need to focus on in an Agile project. But the reason we focus on this and we retain this focus is because as we become flexible throughout the life cycle of the project and we go through our iterations, the thing that doesn't change anywhere near as much, I'm not saying it can't, it can sometimes change, but the thing that tends not to change is the impact that is needed to be had on the customer organization or the customer department or the end users. They want to increase their revenue. They want to sell more. They want to have more customers. They want to have stronger customers. These things are fundamental to their business paradigm. These are business issues for them, for the customer. And our project needs to constantly be aware that we are impacting business outcomes through this process. So vision has this duality to it, this mutual function. This is why the vision process in creating the vision sits across both the technical development side of what the project team is trying to do and the business analyst side or the business case aspect of why it needs to do it in the first place. So this leads us to the first of our quotes tonight, and it's from someone that hopefully most of you will know and be familiar with, Winston Churchill, who made the suggestion that to improve is to change, but to be perfect is to change often. And this is a mentality that rings true with people that consider themselves, or the people that are proponents of agile thinking and agile management. Because the idea that a pursuit of positive change is akin to a pursuit for perfection. So if the business change is using projects as a tool, and these projects are used to change the business or the organization for the better, then the constant pursuit of positive change, as in the embracing of the pursuit of flexibility, is part of the pursuit to perfection. So by embodying an agile methodology, we're saying that we're not going to just say, okay, the project and the decision to launch the project is our testimony to improvement and change. That's not enough. That's not where we stop with our pursuit of positive change. We pursue it at every possible stage, at every possible decision gate throughout the life of the project, which would be potentially at every iteration. We look at the pursuit of positive change. Let's look at some of the activities that happen within the envision phase. Now, these are 4 major activities or categories of investigation that we need to think about when we're creating the vision. The first part of the vision is the concept. This is where we need to look at a definition of what it is we're trying to achieve from, as we just said, the definition or the point of view of the business impact that it's going to have. But the second thing we need to look at is about the objectives and the constraints. So it's great to turn around and say, we're going to build the world's most awesome CRM system for your sales department. Isn't that great? Well, hang on. There are going to be some specific objectives. We are going to say, well, the CRM has to do certain things because that's how we work, and that's how our industry works, and that's how our customers work. So there are going to be some objectives. Now, in this context, an objective, a required objective, is similar to a constraint. It's something that we have to do. It's not something we can say, well, it'll be nice if we had that, but if we don't have it, it doesn't matter. An objective is something that is a must-have. And a constraint is the opposite. It's also something where we say, well, we have to do it, but within these limitations. So we might say, well, you have to be able to import our legacy customer database. That's a constraint. This must happen. You can't build us something that doesn't tap into our existing data. Well, if we're thinking from a sales CRM perspective, that would make sense. But that requirement needs to translate into what the team is thinking about. So the envision process is to understand what are the for and against, what are the must-haves and mustn't-dos in our project. The third point here is community. Now, community is the people, and we'll drill down on more on that in a moment. And the approach is the practices and principles. Now, before we drill down on each of these, let's look at a second point about change. And this is one by another name that most of you should know. Charles Darwin was quoted as saying that it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is the most adaptable to change. What Agile takes from this is to say that the most successful project is the one that is the most adaptable to change, but with the goal in mind of survivability. Remember, Charles Darwin said survival of the species means that the only goal is to continue, to survive, to succeed, to procreate. That is the species goal. Our project needs to maintain focus on its goal, the vision statement of what we're trying to achieve. And then the most flexible path to that will usually be the most successful path. So what do we do? Let's look at these things again. Now, I've changed the name of point 2. Remember in point 2 a moment ago we called them objectives and constraints? I've used the label here of the project data sheet because that's the tool, that's the object that we use. So the vision is what will it look like when it's finished. This is where we talk about things such as designing the box. So the process of box design, which sometimes can go a little bit too far, but it's the concept of brainstorming and workshopping the idea of what are all the things this is going to be and do and look like. And sometimes if you're talking about a physical product, that might mean designing the box that it's going to get wrapped up in. But that's also a philosophical concept. If you're dealing with something that's non-physical, then still you're looking to define the elevator pitch. Define it in the context of a simple statement. The elevator pitch being the 30 seconds to 2 minutes statement of what this thing is. Now, the project data sheet is all of the project boundaries on a single page. So it's the requirements, the objectives that must be there, and the constraints that must apply. And it's all listed out in one page so that it's easy to see at a glance. But then we get to community. And this is where it becomes a little bit more important. The community, choosing the community is about having the right people and only the right people, which means we try to avoid having the disruptive, incongruent, inappropriate people. Even though we might have a good team, there's the one bad egg syndrome. So community is about saying that the people are the answer, but if we get that wrong, people can also be the problem. So having the right people in an agile sense is not just about having the right skills. It's not just about having the right aptitude or ability. It means having the right behavior as well. And as we've already talked about in the self-organizing concepts of agile teams, there needs to be an element of self-discipline as a part of that behavior. Now, in contrast, a lot of the time with plan-based projects, when we talk about the right people, it's usually in the context of skill set. We usually talk about it and saying, well, we need this expertise here and we need that expertise there. So you plug that with that person and you plug this with this person. And they may hate each other, but that's not usually the first thing that's thought about. And sometimes it's not even thought about. Agile puts that right up alongside their ability, because usually ability is easier to replace than attitude within an individual. So a lot of people in Agile say that people is the most important question out of all of these. It doesn't necessarily matter how clear you are on what you're going to build. I disagree. I do think that the vision statement is the most important. But community and the people involved are certainly the most important ingredient in making that happen. Keep in mind that in plan-based or bureaucratic systems, most of the bureaucratic elements are designed to handle that small handful of people that don't fit. Those small people that are in the wrong person category, that are the wrong person for this project, the wrong person for this team, the wrong person for this environment. A large percentage of bureaucracy is built to deal with the implications and repercussions of that syndrome. What Agile is saying is that we are in focus on getting the right people and rely less upon bureaucratic methods and processes of dealing with the inappropriate people. Obviously, that's an objective that doesn't always arrive in reality. Sometimes we are in situations where we need to deal with people that we'd rather not. That's why we're all great leaders, of course. Now, when we're talking about teams and community, I want to make a point here about occasionally there being a difference between a development team, people that are at the engine room of creation, compared to a product team. And some examples are when we're going to create a piece of software, there might be a product team that is comprised of people such as those that are going to sell that. If it's an internal product, you might be in an organization that sells software, and you've decided to create a new CRM software package that you're going to sell to prospective customers. Well, your product team are going to be often people from the sales perspective, people who have to go out there and get customers for this particular thing that we've created. They are the customer from the development team's point of view. They are representing the people that are ultimately one day hopefully going to buy this piece of software that we're creating. But there's going to be people that deal with the project or the outcome of this project on an ongoing basis. There'll be people who need to maintain it. There'll be people who need to work with it. There'll be people who need to merchandise it, brand it, promote it, advertise it. These are typically components of a product team that live with the product for the product's life cycle, not the project life cycle. The project life cycle is the creation stage. This is where we build it. And yes, that can overlap with the delivery and ongoing maintenance to some extent, sometimes for long periods. But in general terms, we look at these teams differently, and the way in which these teams interconnect, the way in which they interact with each other is important. You need to have strong leadership in each of these categories, and those points of leadership need to be able to collaborate and work together. This is probably some of the most important community decisions or team decisions that you'll be able to make when putting these teams together. And sometimes you can't make the decision. Sometimes you can't decide that, you know, Fred's going to do this job and Mary's going to do this job. Sometimes those decisions are already set. And whether or not we succeed or not with our project will often be highly dependent on how well we, as if we're the project manager, can facilitate the working relationship between product manager or product owner and the development team leader or the scrum master, as the case may be. This comes from the point where we say that we're talking about coaches and people that lead other people. There's a concept that says that the best coaches can only get the best out of their players and nothing more. People are only capable of delivering their best. And when we're in an agile team and the best that people can deliver is not good enough, then we're in a little bit of trouble. So this is the reason for the emphasis on making sure that we have people who at their best can deliver what's necessary. And our job and our role and the role of the key people and leaders in that is to help their people work at the best. Now, when we talk about approach, this is where we start talking about the practices, the guiding principles, and any particular processes that do need to exist. Now, we talk about processes with a little bit of caution here. Processes, we already know, occasionally processes are fairly straightforward, but in an agile concept, we tend to refer to them as practices. Generally accepted practices, generally shared and understood practices, guidelines, principles. We look at the flexible side of it. Now, obviously, not every practice is going to be equally flexible. There will be some variations. For example, a testing practice that talks about how we test. If we have some demanding and non-flexible standards of quality, then we might need to have some fairly rigid practices in regard to testing, especially if we have an arrangement that makes it quite financially penalizing to us if we don't meet those quality standards. So the difference between a practice and a process is in the flexibility. A practice is more about setting the boundaries of how we conduct ourselves and how we act and perform, whereas a process has more of a join the dots method to it. So this brings us to the next stage of talking about the iteration. I just want to pause there and see if we can maybe cover some specific questions with Alex's help in regards to the envision phase that we can draw upon now, because we're going to shunt our brains a little bit on a few other things. Alex, can I ask, do you have any good suggestions for questions about the vision phase that we've just covered that might be worth covering now?
Yeah, there's a couple. We had someone ask whether you should enter solution mode during the envision stage or if this should be avoided.
That's a good question, and to answer it philosophically, I mean, obviously the answers to this is always going to lie in the specifics of the situation. There does need to be a certain degree of solution-based investigation before you can properly understand what something can do. If you work entirely on vision that has no basis in reality, then you might be embarking upon an agile project, and no matter how flexible you are, you're just never going to get there. You need enough of a reality check in the envisioning process, and this is why we talk about envisioning as being an inclusive, collaborative process. It's not just the business decision. Members of the team or the team leadership or the key expertise representatives should be involved even before you've chosen the entirety of the team. You need key people involved in the envision phase to turn around and say, no, that's not going to work. You know, the technology doesn't work like that. That's a square peg. You're looking at a round hole. It isn't going to fit. But if you did this, this would work and that would happen. You need at least that much reality check in your envisioning phase to make sure that your final vision, which then eventually comes to the point of building it, has enough reality, expertise, and substance in it to move forward. So you do need a certain amount of it. Exactly how much depends upon the degree of technological complexity in what you're building, the degree of familiarity that your executive decision makers have with that kind of technology. If it's highly technical and outside of their skill set, you'll need to lean on the experts a little bit more in those kinds of roundtable discussions. But if it's something that the managers are highly familiar with in good enough, then you may need less of that. What else have we got, Alex?
We've got another envision question, actually. Someone asked where a business analyst role fits into the envision stage.
I think that's exactly where they fit, and quite possibly doesn't fit very well in a lot of other places in the process. A business analyst is a bit of a translator. The role of business analyst is typically to form a bit of a gap between a lot of the practical, technical, mundane, detailed, and link that back to high-level decisions or contributions to decisions. So the business analyst is a function, and I wouldn't necessarily say that you're talking about the traditional business analyst. They need to be a business analyst that understands the agile paradigm and how the process works enough to work with it rather than work against it. But what you are certainly doing is you are analyzing the business pros and cons of the decisions at that level. So in a pure sense, that is definitely part of the activity and functionality that you're doing, and you do need the right people with who can, I mean, the important thing about business analysts is that their job is usually to ask the right questions. They don't normally sit there with a pile of answers telling us how to do their thing, but they ask usually the right questions and get the right people to contribute to the information, to the discussion, so that good decisions get made at the end of the day. Any more on envisaging, Alex, or should we move forward?
Just one more. Is there a tangible output from the envision phase, something that we have to have documented or agreed upon before we can move on to the next phase?
There is, and what we've just looked at, I'm going to go back a slide and explain it this way. You're going to get from the vision statement, you're going to get the elevator pitch. No more than 2 minutes of presentation. Now that can be defined in a single page or half a page of written word if it gets converted into a document. It's brief. The project data sheet is all the boundaries on a single page. The community is a list of people. How long is that going to be? It depends how big your project is. And again, the approach, it could be a page, it could be less than that. But the approach is going to list and summarize and to some extent explain the relevance of particular practices that have been decided need to be relevant or need to be included, or the guiding principles that are relevant. And that can be often a page. Now, that means that the entire output or outcome out of this can be only a handful of pages. Certainly less than 5, often 2 or 3, depending on the size of the project. And as long as your documentation captures and has been created through a process of collaboration and buy-in and has encompassed all of these points, then you've usually got enough to take to the next stage. This is a little bit different from, because this is where we first really deviate from plan-based project management, where you're not going to go anywhere from here unless you have absolutely everything included in your project management plan, and you're going to have a communication plan, you're going to have a stakeholder engagement plan, you're going to have a scheduling plan, you're going to have a cost management plan, etc. That's not the same here, and that's probably one of the most stark contrasts that occurs with Agile. All right, let's move forward, and we'll get into the discussion about the iteration stage or phase of this. And we've already talked about this at the beginning. The 3 stages of the iteration phase are the speculate, explore, and adapt. And these can be a little bit confusing at first because the way in which these words apply is a little bit unusual. It's not necessarily intuitive exactly what we mean and how it means what they do. So when we're talking about the speculate phase, we're talking about decisions that we're not yet ready for. We talked about decisions in the pre-recorded. Some of you might already know that we talked about speculate as being just another word for decision, just another word for plan. But it's planning where we have a greater degree of respect and acknowledgement for the uncertainties that we're taking into account. And when we do speculate, we are essentially making educated assumption as to how we're going to go forward. But we're also saying, well, these decisions are decisions we're going to have to make, but we're going to speculate that this is how the decision is going to plan out. And then we're going to go and try and do that, and then we're going to be ready to change our minds if it doesn't work out the way we thought. So the speculate phase is where we create stories. And the stories is a very important phrase here, it's a very important label, because we talk about stories as being a little bit vague, a little bit uncertain, because as we know, anytime you tell a story, it kind of changes every time you tell the story. It becomes a little bit different every time. So stories are perspective. You can tell the same story slightly different way many different times, but you can always get the same message from it. Imagine how many different ways the story of the boy who cried wolf has been told. But we all get the moral of the story, no matter how it's, well, usually, no matter how it's, as long as it's done sensibly, of course. But we're assuming that we're all sensible here in the world of project management. So speculate is the creation of the initial small-scale plan, the creation of the stories, and the creation of the product backlog. So if you're looking for an output in that regard from the speculate phase, it's the product backlog. But we're only speculating as far ahead as we can reasonably see. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail when we look at the delivery framework in the release plan. So explore, this is where it's even more confusing, because exploration, we think about it in terms of walking into the great unknown. But in an iteration context, to explore is to build. It is to create. It is to create with what we've done out of our speculation. Speculation says this is what we're going to do. Explore says this is what we've done. So speculate, what will we do? We're going to go and do this. Here's our backlog of things we're going to do. Explore, we create the value. We do it. We make the decisions at the time as and when we can. So adapt is where we respond to those decisions. So what did we do? Did it work? Did it succeed? Did it fail? Did it build value? Now, for those thinking, well, hang on, this is still explore, doesn't make sense to me. Think about exploration from a more old-fashioned point of view. Imagine the early explorers that wandered across an unknown land, or a land that they didn't know at least. There was usually people there already, but let's imagine they're trying to explore a path through a difficult area of terrain. They don't know where to go. They're going to choose a direction to travel. They're going to choose a path. They're going to speculate and say, well, if we walk down here and around here, maybe we can get through these mountains. That's their speculate. We're going to do this. And then they explore. They do it, and they go and find what's there. They, in the project sense, they build it, and they find out how good it works based on their speculation. And sometimes they find the right path, and they don't need to repeat it. They don't need to double back and backtrack. Their speculation was correct. They've built something that was of value. They've arrived at the next step in their journey. But occasionally, they don't get through. They don't get to where they want. They don't achieve their goal. They don't build the value that they're looking for. Feedback comes back and says, well, look, hang on, we've gone the wrong way. Let's back up a few paces and go the other direction. And the adapt phase is where we say, well, let's adapt our journey. Let's adapt our direction, our path, and our activity. So adapting is the constant change for perfection, or the positive change for perfection. Of course, that little yellow, hard to see, curvy arrow at the bottom, that tells us that we do it again and again and again and again. This is the cyclic iteration. Once we've adapted, we feed that data back into the speculate and say, all right, we're going to speculate again now. All right, so we learned that that was a dead end down that path. Now we're going to take this path, and we think this might be more successful. So we try that. Now, in closing, we don't need to talk a great deal about closing. Some of closing of a project of any kind is somewhat similar and somewhat self-explanatory. But a few points I want to make here. We do need to bring everything full circle. And that means that in closing any Agile project, it's got to link back to the objectives and the vision statement. Remember, we talked about the vision, we talked about the business objectives, we talked about things like the ROI, we talked about the fact that we need to have a clear understanding of what value we're going to create at a strategic level. And the closing of any Agile business is where we compare that, where we test that, where we look at that question and say, well, did we achieve those goals? And it's the vision that defines our success criteria that we measure in the closure phase. But closure, remember, we're talking a lot about people. People are crucial. Good people, the right people, the appropriate community is crucial to the success of our Agile project. And the closure of anything that people have personally invested in. And remember, we are expecting and hoping for a higher level of personal investment in the work and the work ethic that people contribute in an Agile project. It's more personal. If it was a different kind of project where their commitment and self-discipline was perhaps less important, or at least the consistency of that self-discipline was less important, then we might be less concerned about the personal attachment that people get. But people get more attached to Agile projects than they do to other types of projects. So we need to treat the humans like humans. We need to make sure that our closure processes deal with all the things necessary to help people move on to the next thing. And there's two kinds of moving on problems, too fast and too slow. There are people who are actually already over the project that they've been working on, and they're already working on the next project in their head. They're thinking about it. They're wondering about it. They might even be applying for it if it's with another company. But then there's the other project people that they just don't want it to end. They've always got one more thing to do. They want to keep going. They want the team to keep going. Now, we need to be sensitive to the emotional factors involved and make sure that we are bringing closure in an appropriate way. Don't let things just die out and peter out and have people drift off and go off and do other things and just have it end a sad, unhappy ending. We do need such things as the celebration. We do need the recognition. And we do need the recognition amongst peers, not the email 6 weeks later that no one else ever knows about that says, hey, you did a good job back then. That was great. So keeping in mind that we have personal closure to occur, there's also the correct business perspective of our closure of our project is what helps us as a team, as a project manager, and as an organization move happily towards the next project. If we can tick the success box, then it's a lot easier for us to move forward and say, right, let's do the next thing with faith, with confidence, with support, with smiles instead of frowns. There's a an early generation life coach, and honestly I couldn't remember who it was, but this is actually a quote that I heard a few decades ago. In fact, success is a commitment to completion, and I think it was probably someone like Bob Proctor or Paul Meyer, or it might have even been David Hill or someone. But the point out of this is that success is about completion. When we have completed the project and everyone knows that it's completed and everyone can enjoy that closure moment, that's when we as humans can enjoy success at an emotional level as well as an intellectual level. And the difference I make there is that if it's not an emotional success as well as an intellectual success, then we have to post-rationalize. And we say, well, yeah, I guess that was successful. You know, we ticked these boxes, but why don't I feel happy about it? Success needs to be at all levels. And it's about the certainty of completion. Usually the reason that problem occurs, people don't feel like it's successful, don't feel like it's finished, is because there was something incomplete. And project managers need to be very aware of those elements and making sure they get resolved. Now we're going to talk in a moment, or talk now, about planning in the context of release plans. So before I do that, I just want to check with Alex to see if we've got any good questions about what we've just discovered or talked about in the iteration or the closure phase. Anything that's come out of that, Alex, about speculate, explore, and adapt? Questions relating to any of that we can talk about now?
Yes, there was someone who asked where the acceptance criteria fit in between explore and speculate.
Acceptance criteria. So if we look back at our vision statement and we look at the measures of success at a strategic level, but then we say that we're looking at the speculate at an iteration level, then we're looking at the success criteria on a per story basis. Now, we call them stories because they are definitions of success from the perspective of the customer. And the success criteria are part of the definition of the story. Because at the beginning of the speculate, we say, okay, this is the story from the customer. The customer wants something that does this. For example, we're talking about our example of a CRM software package. As a salesperson, the salesperson wants to review the history of customers who have spent more than X amount of dollars in the last 3 months. Sounds like a useful thing for a salesperson to want to know. So they might put that as a user story. It needs to do this. And that might mean, we've got to create some code and some people got to do some stuff to make that happen. So the definition of the success criteria out of that will come from our interpretation of what is truly meant by that story. And this is where the dialogue between the product owner and the project manager or the Scrum Master in this context as well, if they're talking about Scrum, they are needing to communicate the certainty and the specificity that's necessary to get that user story across. Now, if there's uncertainty and vague about, well, let's say the story is just simply, well, I want to be able to see a history of data. The development team might come back and say, well, that's too vague. Can you tell us more about over what period of time, what kind of data, in what parameters, from whose perspective, from which login are we talking about? And these things are questions that will effectively do the job of success criteria for that story. And then what happens is that during the iteration or during the explore phase, the production team go and try and build to that criteria. And then during the adapt phase, it's reviewed. And assuming it does do what the story was defined and agreed upon, because remember, all these discussions are in consultation between the product owners or the representatives of the customer and the development team. This happens every iteration. So there's really no good excuse for not having a clear understanding and an agreed understanding of what's going to happen and what the user stories mean. But if it's not right, or if it is uncertain, or if it has been misinterpreted, that's what the adapt phase looks at. It says, well, where did we get this incorrect? What went wrong here? And the emphasis is to say, well, it's not so much the work that was wrong, but it was the plan that went wrong. It was the story itself that's more likely at fault. Not always, but more likely. So hopefully that gives an explanation as to the way in which this process tackles such things as requirements in that sense. Any more, Alex, that we can cover for now?
Yeah, actually on that topic, we had someone ask before what the difference between a business requirement and a user story is. Does that mean it's definitions of success coming from different parties?
It's a good question, and it's one that we're actually going to answer in a moment, I think. What I might do is, well, we'll come back to that in a few minutes, because I think what we're about to talk about may well answer. Well, I'll make sure it does. We will cover that in a few minutes when we go through some of the areas of capability, because capability is an important point that we'll talk about that I think answers that question. So we've got time for one more for now, and then we'll move on.
All right. We had someone ask what the hierarchy is between these epic, feature, user story, and what they translate to in a waterfall world.
I'm going to save that question as well, because I'll make sure we answer that when we cover the next step. So good questions, because it'll help shape what we talk about in a moment. So let's move forward and do that. So planning is talking about release planning, and the questions that have just been raised touch on this point, because this is where we try to form a link between individual user stories, which look at features, to another word for features. Although stories is a better word that's more widely accepted now. But they have also been called features from the same perspective. So they're individually identifiable outcome. But when we're planning a release of a piece of software, for example, or a Agile project, we're planning it where we need to have a collection of stories or a collection of features that add up to something that's useful in its own self-contained right. Now, we talk about planning the release or a release plan, because this is still a project. Yes, it's, in this case of our example with our CRM package, yes, it's software development. But it's still a project in the pure sense, and we still need to manage it with a project mindset, and that's a strategic mindset. What we mean by that is that the iterations that we string together, they need to have a meaning beyond simply being a collection of iterations which has spat out a bunch of features or stories at the end of it. The relationship at the strategic level between those stories needs to have a strategic sense to it. So sometimes we need to think about what's going to go into a particular iteration based on how it's going to contribute to a larger parcel of outcome. So this is a link between flexibility and outcomes, because we're saying, well, yeah, it's great to work in an iteration on a whole bunch of things that we're kind of keen and like to work on, and the next iteration, yeah, it'd be fun to work on something completely unrelated. And strictly speaking, in an Agile context, maybe we can do that, but maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should work on a related, connected, synergistic element of the project in the next iteration that we work on, so that after 3 or 4 iterations, we have built several pieces of our project that, when put together, can comprise a working major piece of functionality for our project. And this is where release planning comes into play. This is where we look at not just what happens within an iteration. This is where we plan what pieces of the larger story, which we call an epic, get put into which iterations. This is where we look at accumulated value. So we've talked inside the iteration about individual value. The value, and we talked from a moment ago about requirements and the user story and the value that that user story has at the end of the iteration, how we met that value requirement, etc. But then the accumulated value is the value that the project as a whole is accumulating, iteration after iteration after iteration. And we want, as much as we can, to have that accumulated value able to be wrapped up and partially released as a separable component. So the concept of the epic. Now, we use the word epic because it retains the theme of the story. Many stories form an epic. So an epic is simply a collection of interrelated stories that make sense. For example, we gave a feature example before of a salesperson who wants to look up customers who had a certain expenditure over a certain period of time. Now, this would fall under a category of customer history reporting. There might be a whole ton of user stories or features that are demanded and expected to give the salespeople information about the history of expenditure of their customers in a variety of ways from a variety of means and perspectives. Now, all of the user stories that contribute towards that major chunk of functionality, they might be called an epic. And usually we'll want to do that epic in a largely organized and contiguous fashion, where possible, where appropriate. That means that what we don't do is we say, well, we're going to do a whole bunch of this reporting, and then 6 months later, with another dozen iterations in between, we're going to work on the other half of it. Yeah, we could, but doing it contiguously, usually a lot more effective. So the release plan is the plan that takes all that into account. It's the release plan that says, okay, well, if we, over 3 iterations, focus on delivering these pieces, these user stories, these pieces of functionality, then at the end of it, we will have a large epic and we'll call it customer expenditure reporting. And we'll tie a bow on it and call it done. And maybe it's not. Maybe in a few months' time, when we're busy working on something else, that will reveal some change. And the customer will say, well, you know that work you did for me 6 months ago on creating this awesome reporting for expense. Well, we'd like to do this a bit differently now. We'd like to tweak that because we can see some advantages in doing it. Well, great, we're agile. We can tweak. No problem. But we have a plan to begin with. Now, our plan takes these things into account. Return on investment. Sometimes, if we can package up a partial release, we can get paid for it. And that's usually a good thing. So progress payments, which are an important part of many projects, especially longer scale, long-term projects, are a way of measuring return on investment. If we can package something and get paid for it in its identifiable way, then that's usually a driving factor behind release planning. Also, risk. Now, there's a couple of ways that we deal with risk in release planning. If we can do the risky stuff first, then we've got a better chance of evolving and adapting that risky stuff and get to a more stable, less risky situation with it. But if we leave all the risky stuff to the end, and that risky stuff, when we do it, yields startling feedback that we weren't prepared for, we may have wasted some effort that we didn't know we would have to waste. So the high-risk work is often done early in a release plan, and it's part of our risk mitigation strategy. The guidelines for success, when we look at the guidelines, we look at things such as, well, for example, I said originally it has to be able to tap into our existing data. There might be guidelines that say, well, we needed to interface with legacy systems. We needed to interface with our parent company based in Berlin, and they use something completely different. Well, these are guidelines that we need to think about. We need to be something that a new employee can use from day one. Whatever the guideline is, there needs to be an awareness in the release plan of how these guidelines apply. And this results in prioritization. So effectively the decision is, well, what do we do when? What comes first? At some level, at some strategic level, there is a strategic plan surrounding the prioritization. It's not just about Agile isn't random. It's not saying, well, let's work on database today and let's work on something else completely different next time around. Well, only if that makes sense. Because ultimately you want everyone to operate in a space of comfort. And that doesn't mean comfort just for those people that get bored doing the same thing too much and they want to do something different. Yeah, it's comfortable for them to be interesting doing different things, but from a business point of view, from a customer point of view, from the return on investment point of view, from lots of other point of views, everyone needs and deserves a degree of comfort. And a strategic release plan is part of the mechanism that gives management, executive, project manager, and the customer comfort of strategic progress. So this is what the multi-level release plan looks like. These numbers, this is pulled out of the book for those of you who have read it. These numbers are arbitrary. So a roadmap is a journey, an entire journey for a particular, well, not so much the project, but perhaps the product that it relates to. A roadmap can have multiple releases. Now, a release is when you can say that you've got all of the functionality wrapped up and finished. Now, a release in this example is a one-year release. You might have a release that's only 6 months. But a release is where you can finish a large portion of software with multiple features and functions and say, this thing is done. Here's your CRM system. Now we're going to work on your data, your distribution and warehousing software that dovetails into that perhaps. And the roadmap might include both of these. But then we look at waves, and this is the really interesting part for me. Waves are really quite important. They're a bit new and novel compared to other types of methodologies. A wave is where you have a number of iterations designed to achieve and accomplish functionality that you can tie up and say, there's an epic that's done. So epics and waves are intended to line up in our release planning. So you look at a wave 3 months. Well, what epics can we get? Well, we can get the customer reporting thing done. Great. Okay. Well, we can get this other thing done. All right. Great. So then we look at the individual user stories and we start planning out the first iteration and what can we fit in that first iteration. But we've already planned loosely what we're going to fit into our wave. Do we plan what's going to happen in the next wave? Not very much. Sometimes not at all. But usually we have some idea at the release level of all the things that need to happen before we can put a release. If we've got a release of 1 year, we've got to make sure that after wave 1, we probably want to have 25% of our value accumulated. And if we don't, we need to be thinking about why. And then we come down to the iteration. And yeah, maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's 1, maybe it's 4, whatever. The iteration is where you get a number of iterations inside a wave. And these are building blocks. So you don't get 2.5 or 3.5 iterations in a wave. The waves end when the iterations end. They line up. So the iteration is where we sit down at the planning meeting and say, right, what are we going to get done in this iteration? We know strategically what we're going to need to get done in the entire wave, and we know which of those we want to get done in this iteration. We've got a rough idea of what we might think about for the next iteration because it's going to relate to it, but we're not going to plan that yet. We're only going to plan this iteration now. We're making just-in-time decisions. So this concept of what goes into what scale of planning and management, this is the project management of Agile. This is different from the Scrum mastering of Agile in terms of the Scrum system, where you have a day-to-day taskmaster looking at what's going on every day. This is different from the product owner or product manager aspect. This is where the true project management of Agile comes into play. This brings us to the point of capability. So capability is a key point because when we talk about capability, capability is the word that we use to define, or another way of describing it is functionality. So we know what a feature is. It's a little thing. You do this, you get this result. That's great. Capability is the capability of whatever the project is delivering. Capability is measured from a business perspective. So let me put this another way. Feature, user story says, I want to know what customers have spent how much in the last 3 months. Remember this feature we talked about a moment ago? So what does this mean in terms of capability? I want my sales team to be able to target the customers that spend the most and have spent the most recently because they're the easiest targets to sell to. And I want my sales team to know who they are so they can target them as a priority. That is a business capability. So in the envision stage, this would be something that the customer would have said, I want my team to be able to do this. This is important to me, this capability for my team. And this is going to translate into a capability that looks at it and breaks it down into individual stories. So the capability is what the customer business is going to pay for. If we can deliver something that says, yes, your team now can do all those things. They can find out who's spending and when and how much, etc. Great. I'm going to pay for that capability because that capability is of value to me, to my organization. And that's where transactions between businesses take place, for capability. So capability is what gets paid for. People don't pay for features. So the story is of value to the user at the user level and often defined by the user. Capability is the value to the organization or to the business and is usually defined at the management or executive level of that customer organization or department if it's internal. And epics that we talked about, remember epics are large clusters of story that go together and work together to perform some major piece of functionality. Well, epics relate to capability and we often define them together. So some of these words and labels are a little bit interchangeable. Some people talk about it as functionality, some people talk about it as capability, some people talk about it as an epic. It's a clearly defined and typically commercially measurable and therefore payable moment of success in our project deliverables. So capability is definitely in the domain of the project manager. That's the project manager's job. Manage capability. Deliver capability so that we all keep getting paid. And so at the end of our release, we've delivered the capability that was promised at the beginning, or capability that's on par, even if it's not exactly what was promised because they may have changed their mind. So a bit of an adage here, clients want features, and they often talk about features, and they love features, but what they really pay for are functions, and that's at the small level. What they really pay for at the higher level is capability, the capability of whatever it is we're building. So let me go back to Alex, and hopefully I have answered this question. For those of you who asked those couple of questions that we postponed, if you've got another question or a new question, or if I haven't quite answered it already, throw it back in there, and we'll deal with it now. I want to see if Alex has got any questions that we can talk about regarding the delivery, the release planning that we can talk about before we talk about the next and final stage in our discussion tonight.
Sure. Does the 2 weeks iteration include speculate, explore, and adapt, or can speculate alone be the two?
It includes all three because each iteration you have to decide what you're going to do it, and then decide whether or not that was the right thing to do. And if you skip the adapt phase, then you effectively don't have a feedback loop. And if you don't have a feedback loop, then you don't have any influence or guiding on what you're doing. You're just building whatever it is you feel like it because you feel like it. And so unless you have that feedback loop, which is the adapt, unless you take that knowledge and apply it and make use of it, then you're not agile. You might be iterative. You're not actually iterative. You're staged. You work in cycles, but the cycles don't get any feedback, so they're not really an iteration. An iteration means that you improve upon it. It is something where you take another look and try again. So yes, you need to have all three, and all three properly done to really consider it a proper agile iteration. What else we got, Alex?
Is capability the same as business benefits?
I would say you could describe that, yes. Again, we're talking about terminology that sometimes sounds like we're splitting hairs. One of the things that Agile tries not to do is put hard and fast labels on what we mean by stuff, which is a little bit in contrast to what you get, for example, when some of the issues, so those of you who are familiar with the PMI and Prince 2, you're going to find that half the battle sometimes is just working out the terminology that they use. It means the same thing, but they've used different words for branding purposes just because they want to be different from each other. Agile tries to shy away from that. So yeah, you could say capability is a business benefit. It means the same thing, and different businesses will talk about it different ways. This is why it's important to understand the concept of capability, not just the label or the definition of capability. So yes, if the customer is talking to you in those terms, that's fine, work with that. Don't try and confuse them or you by talking about it differently. Any more, Alex? We got any more?
Yep. If the stories are the stories signed off on by the dev team and the epics by the project manager, or should both of those be signed off on by the dev team?
Dev team should be involved in the discussion at both levels, depending on the size of your dev team, and that there's an element of that we'll talk about in a moment, actually, when we talk about our final stage. But certainly, the dev team needs to have an input, an appropriate input into deciding the epic and the wave relationships. But this is the point where the project manager, after that, usually steps away. The project manager is less likely the person involved at the iteration planning level. They are involved at the wave planning level that says, all right, well, at the end of this wave, we need to have these capabilities working so that I can invoice the client. Is that good? Good? Right, okay, carry on. And then you get into your, for example, your Scrum Master then sits down with the team and says, right, what are we going to do in this iteration? And they get cracking on that. And quite often the project manager doesn't need to be involved in that step and that phase. But certainly the team, you'll have the entire team probably involved in various stages of the iteration planning, but you might have representatives of the team involved in the wave planning session if you've got a large team. But definitely they're not left out. One more, Alex, and then we'll have our last bit of discussion.
Yep. Just asking what the difference between the envision objectives and the release plan guidelines are.
So the envision objectives is what it needs to do. What are the outcomes that need to be achieved? The release planning is saying, well, if this is all of the outcomes that we need, what order are we going to do them in? How are we going to group them together? So it's the relationship between the things, the components of the vision. So the vision is going to be complex. It's not going to be just say, well, we need a CRM system. It's going to talk a lot more about the parameters of how that CRM system needs to improve the customer's business and work for that customer's needs. So that expression is going to then get broken up and say, well, we can do this large piece of capability in the first wave, and then let's look at doing this large piece of capability in the next wave. And so the release plan is the sequencing, if you like, the scheduling or the loose arrangement of how the components of the vision get implemented and delivered by the project team. But it means that the project manager is the one looking at that at the highest level, so that the team and the Scrum Master can look at it at the granular level and not worry too much about what's going to happen in 6 months' time, because they really need to focus on what they're doing in the next 2 weeks. All right, we are getting close to our time tonight, but it's okay. We will hang in there for questions at the end, so you do stick with it. We will hang on a little bit for that. But there's a couple more slides I want to get through, and there's the final point about scaling that we want to talk about. Now, just before we do talk about that tonight, I want to just raise the issue of communication, because those of you who have done various study in waterfall-based communication or have read a little bit about it, you will have heard talk about how important communication is. And it's something that we've kind of glossed over a little bit. And I want to talk a little bit about a practical aspect of communication that we need to think about in any kind of project methodology, but certainly within an Agile context. And that is to keep in mind that there are 3 stages of true communication. We need to remember that communication is not information. It's not the transfer of information. Communication is a 2-way process. It's in fact a cycle. And the cycle we look at is we need to prepare the recipient for the information that we need them to have. This can be things like making sure that they are aware that certain information will be coming to them, needs to come to them. They are aware of the kinds of information that they're going to need in order to do their job and perform in their role. And then we make sure that the information is transmitted. So we make sure that, for example, the team members who are invited to a particular planning meeting, they know why they're there. They know what's going to be discussed, and they know why it's going to be discussed, and they know what is expected of them. And then we make sure that they are given whatever previous contextual information is necessary, and then they take part in the meeting. And if they're there to contribute, then their contribution is sought. Then the final step in the communication paradigm is we need to confirm what gets communicated. Now, that can mean communication. That can mean by making sure that there are mechanisms in place that multiple people get the same information, so that if members of the team are misaligned, that they have people readily available that they can confirm and check things. It means that when we look at what's coming out of planning meetings, there is enough analysis and revision of that to say, well, is this information, is this communication working? For example, if the project manager communicates to the team and says, right, so in this particular wave, we really need to get this piece of functionality and capability delivered early, because this is high risk, it's exploratory, we don't know how this is going to be, and the customer's really itching for this and they'll pay for it if they can get it early. And correctly communicating that to the team, and the team correctly communicating back, is really crucial. And one of the big weaknesses I've seen with communication is that it tends to be too one-directional. People put a message out there, they send an email, they make a statement, and they just walk away and leave it at that. True communication in a true dynamic team environment has the 3 steps. Here's another way of looking at these 3 steps. The first step is contextualizing and making sure that the people involved have a context for the communication itself. Then there's the actual communication, the content of the message. And thirdly is the action that results. Because every time we communicate for a purpose. We communicate for an outcome. And nothing matters more than that outcome. And so the action that results from any type of communication, any method of communication, that needs to drive what happens prior to that. That needs to drive the way in which we deliver content and the context that we put ahead of it. So we know from a lot of other studies that we've done and a lot of other research and a lot of other things that communication failure is the single most common cause of failure in traditional projects. What we've got in an Agile context is we're saying that we are creating dynamic, interactive teams. We're creating a lot more interactive. We are actually creating, to a traditional project manager, if you look at that old-fashioned formula of saying how many lines of communication do we have, it's stupendous. We're creating massive interconnected webs of communication. But we keep each little web small enough that it doesn't get out of hand. And this is relevant when we start to talk about scaling up. Because if we make sure that empowered communication happens in small enough circles, that it is within relevant circles, then we can get what we've talked about previously, which is clever communications. We can get information that is meaningful and leverages the innovation and the emergence that can come out of it. Otherwise, what we end up getting is communication for the sake of it. A more traditional paradigm is let's just send lots of information out whether they're needed or not. And then it's a case of, why didn't you read my email? So this really applies especially when we start to get bigger. And I want to tackle this discussion by dispelling a few myths. And this is as much about the terminology, I guess, having just said that terminology doesn't really work, but this is about understanding what is really meant by certain things in scaling up and how it really applies. So one of the myths that comes out of this is some people think that an agile method is a simple method because we're doing away with a lot of, well, we're doing away with a lot of effort. We're doing away with a lot of planning. We're doing away with things like, excess documentation. We're ditching a lot of stuff. Surely that makes it simple. Agile is not necessarily simple. It can be more complicated because it is dependent upon a lot more real-time dynamic interaction. And in some situations, in some cases, ensuring that interaction happens in the right way can be more complex. It doesn't always become simple. Really big agile projects cannot be simple. Small is simple. We need to keep in mind that simple is the opposite of complex, but simple comes from the number of interconnected components. So if we're talking about complexity, it lies in the interaction, not in the number of individual components, but in the number of individual components that interconnect. Now, I mentioned before about communication between individuals. If we had a team of 100 people and we somehow wanted them all to share their ideas with each other, that would be complex because you have an enormous number of interactions. But if we have decision teams of 5 or 6 people, then the number of interactions that we have and the complexity of those interactions goes down significantly. And if we can maintain those in the right way, then we can reduce complexity. So a complex system doesn't necessarily mean that it is a rigid system. Process is rigid. Now, sometimes this seems like a parallel because when things get complex, what typically happens? Process gets used. All right, this is complex. We've got lots of things going on here. We need a strict process to follow so that people don't mess this up. Sound familiar? Well, process is rigid. Complexity need not be. If you compartmentalize and create narrow points of interconnect between the complex components, you can reduce complexity without needing process. So if you have process, that doesn't mean you have simplicity. Things don't get simpler just because you have a process. You can still have 1 billion points of interconnect and a process to follow them. You can still have an extremely complex process, and I'm sure we've encountered a few of those in our time. Structure is simplicity. Structure is what says, okay, we are going to narrow and limit the points of interconnect and the points of communication that need to take place in an appropriate way. We will structure those lines of communication so that we don't need to follow regimented processes. And we can break up our complexity and decisions into more simple situations by narrowing the points of interconnection to only those that are necessary. So in the pre-recorded lecture, we talked about examples of this. We talked about the fact that you might have a 100-person team, but when you have to make decisions, you get components of that team that work together and collaborate and make decisions. And then other parts of the team that work together on other decisions. You don't put large numbers of people in a room, and then you don't send out an email to 100 people. So we say structured agile can still be flexible. We can put structure, large-scale structure, into agile methodology and still be flexible, because the structure is there to control the points of interconnection But an agile structure can still improve simplicity. We can still keep things simple by having a structure that makes sure that things are not too interconnected, that the points of interconnection are appropriate and are leveraged and are effective, and I'm not there for the sake of it. Essentially what we're trying to do when we scale up is we're trying to manage the way in which we make decisions. So we don't really scale up the decisions. Large teams can still make good decisions, but they make them in a they can make them in an agile way, but it's a slightly more structured way. When we have too many interactions, we create complexity. This is why, for example, we don't have the entire production team, development team, working on what's happening in wave 2 and wave 3. Because that's an interaction complexity, because an individual person is interacting with many pieces of information to feed into decisions. We want to minimize the number of pieces of information that they need to get in contact with to hold in their head at any one point in time by limiting the number of decisions they need to make to only the decisions they need to make. This is the whole point of breaking it up into iterations. Let's just worry about this iteration. Let's just keep our communication simple. Let's just keep our decision making simple. The same ideas can apply even with big teams. Because what we talked about before about clever interactions, interactions that lead to emergence, interactions where people say, hey, that's a good idea, I'm glad you mentioned that, I hadn't thought of it. Clever interactions occur between people that are familiar with each other, people that trust each other, people that communicate with each other regularly. Intimate teams, intimate interactions can promote emergence. And this raises the point that we did cover a bit in the pre-recorded about the difference between collaboration versus coordination. Coordination is simply a shared understanding of what's going on. It's just all being on the same page. We all know that that's what we're doing. The email copied to 100 people, that's coordination, because we all get the email, we all think, okay, well, that's what's happening. Collaboration is the contribution to the decisions. So collaborators might be structured sub-teams. Small teams, small enough to work together to wield the information and the decisions to make the right decisions. And then different teams make other decisions. So the collaboration is structured and the coordination is, well, it's also structured, but it happens at a different scale. In really small projects, there's no difference. Collaboration and coordination happens at the same level. There's only a small number of people. It's where it gets bigger that you have to separate these two. But this is where good agile people save the day, because agile leaders, people who think agile, we create clever communications, clever interactions among clever people that we've got in our team, and therefore we create clever products from the clever projects that we're running. This is our goal, this is our objective, and it doesn't matter what we're doing, how we're trying to do it, where we're trying to do it, or what size we're trying to do it at. This is the purpose of thinking agile. So, Alex, we've got any more good questions? We've still got actually a few minutes before the bell rings, but we can keep going after that if we've got plenty of good questions. What have we got so far?
Oh, we've got piles of questions. Should system requirements be written for an agile project, or would the accept criterion be sufficient?
System requirements, as I'm familiar with them, is we're talking about, if we're talking about software, we're talking about infrastructure requirements. So if you extrapolate and say, well, you're talking about infrastructure requirements for software provisioning, they might be a guiding principle. They might be a constraint that occurs in the visioning phase up front. You might have a constraint that says in your project data sheet, it's going to have to work on this standard of machine or of infrastructure. It might be a case of saying, and it might not be the old-fashioned how fast is your PC. It might be a bandwidth issue, for example. Yeah, it might be a great idea to put everything on the cloud, but you might need to pull that data over very small connections because we've got some regional locations, or people that are out in the field that need to pull it over 3G, for example. So these sorts of specifications could and often would be, if they're important, they will be part of that initial envision phase in the constraints requirement. If they're not important, then they're not a control variable. If they're a control variable, they're in there up front. If they're a a dependent variable, then they're going to be something that towards the end you're going to say, look, oh, here's this great CRM package that you've got now. By the way, you're going to need to run it on this kind of machine, and you're going to need this kind of bandwidth, and you're going to need to do this, this, and this. Now, presumably, if we've had the freedom and flexibility to contribute to those decisions, then we've made some sensible ones, and we've made it usable over 3G, for example, for those that need it, because that would have been part of what was originally discussed. So it depends on whether it's a control variable or not, I guess, is where you would put that in the puzzle. Hopefully that's answered the question. Let us know if I need to elaborate. And Alex, what else you got?
We've had a lot of questions about people in teams. How do you get the right people across your team if your organisation is silo-based? What do you do if people don't fit in, or if they demand to know things up front? How do you deal with those kinds of problems?
They're the hard problems. I'll grant you that. They're not easy. The few things that I would put in place is that step one, educate. Before you really try to talk to people about whether they should or shouldn't be in the team, you want to educate them on the expectations, and you want to say, okay, this is the kind of team, this is the kind of project, this is the kind of work ethic that's going to be required. Those who aren't comfortable don't volunteer. Those who you might be able to weed out a few obstacles, but that's the first step. The reason I put that first is because if you don't, then you can create some bigger problems for yourself later if you go down the path of you deciding whether or not someone might or might not be suitable, and then later on they tell you that that's not going to work out because they don't like how you're running things. And it's all because they didn't know, they didn't have their expectations set. So step one for me is always education. This is what it really means, folks. The next is buy-in. And I start with finding out who has buy-in and whose buy-in I can get easily. So grab the low-hanging fruit. Find the people who are going to be proactive, who are going to be interested, who do understand, and who think this is a good idea, and work via them. So from that point of view, sometimes you'll be working through those champions to help you identify other people who might or might not be suitable, and also to help other people understand what's really going on or what's really expected. So it moves away from the autocratic process of the project manager coming in and saying, right, this is how I do it, and you're all going to do it my way. Here's my tune, start singing. It moves it to a point of saying, well, if you want to be part of this with your colleagues, then listen to your colleagues about how and what we're going to be doing with all of this, because you're going to have to work with them. Yes, you're going to have to work for me, but that's only the second part of it. More importantly is you're going to have to work with them. And that's the emphasis that I would encourage you to pursue. It's about working together, and sometimes you will make a slightly smoother road because people will say, well, we don't want this person in our team because we don't think they'll fit in, and they'll often spot that and know that better than you. But if you allow that kind of dynamic to take place, sometimes it'll be a little bit easier. Now, these are all hard things to implement and hard things to do. And if you have silos in your organization where a lot of people aren't used to interconnecting with each other, you can sometimes flip that around as a positive. A lot of people, they can be insular, they can be guarded and protective about things outside their domain. But usually when people discover that everyone in the other department are not aliens, they don't have two heads, you can sometimes find that those are actually positives. They can be good reasons for people to interact. When we start to go down this path, you can really tap into any of the traditional ideas of team building. So any good resource that will help give you some tips and insights on building good self-organized teams, whether it be for agile purposes or not, team building, team coaching, etc. There's a lot of more generic resources out there that can do a better job than me that really help to explain some of the ways in which you can do that. But it could be a topic all by itself, actually, and we could go on for hours about it. But I won't, because I'm sure Alex has got some more questions for me.
Sure do. Are there any templates for Agile documents, such as the project data sheet or iteration logs, that are available to people or are standardized?
Yes and no. Standardized, perhaps less so. The book that is mentioned that has, and you could probably find a few of them out there. And I guess if you did do a search on it, you'd find a few remarkably different examples of it. But there is one in Jim Highsmith's book I forget which page number it is, but in that particular chapter, there is a project data sheet that gives you an example of a project and what got included in that project data sheet. That gives you a template or at least a starting point of how yours might look. But as I said, they're not standardized yet because a couple of reasons. First of all, we're not at the stage where any real prescriptive standard has come forward and said, well, this is how you have to do your data sheet. And that's partly because of the fact that the whole point of this is we do what works. What we need to know is the kinds of information that goes into a data sheet, and then we can create our own. But I understand what you mean, that you need a starting point to get your head around it sometimes. And in that sense, any of the resources that you might stumble across on the internet are probably going to be useful to give you an idea of how someone else has done it. That might help you pick how you're going to do it. There's other things that are templates that are simplistic in nature. Looking at how someone has done a elevator pitch and what they've included in it and how it's been included, etc. There's no standard way of doing this. It's the outcomes that you're looking for. I've worked with senior executives that just won't read anything more than a couple of hundred words. So giving them any more than that is just a waste. So it depends on what you're dealing with. Yeah, there's no sort of fixed standard way of doing it. But look around and see what you can find, and you'll get some inspiration.
I've got another one for you. How is risk management done in Agile projects, and how does it differ from how it's applied in waterfall projects?
Risk management in waterfall is about planning. It's about upfront. It's about thinking. It's about having your doom and gloom hat on and thinking of everything that could possibly go wrong with your project, and then deciding what and if you're going to do about it. Risk management in Agile, sometimes the best risk management for a waterfall project is to do it Agile. Because you might say, you might have a project that is just so impossibly difficult to predict all the possible and likely permutations of risk that you're better off doing it iteration by iteration and tackling the risks when they come. So fundamental elements of risk management in Agile, certainly you have the same degree of upfront investigation, saying, well, what could go wrong with this? That's not a process you skip. You still do that. And then usually the way of dealing with it is that you try to front load all your high risk elements up in the beginning of your project. And what that does is that gives you the greatest opportunity throughout the life of the project to use the flexibility and adaptability to find ways of dealing with whatever risk actually materializes. And if it doesn't materialize, well, great, you've passed that hurdle. You can move on with less risky stuff. So that's another element of risk management. One of the hardest things about risk management is when the finance person comes to you and says, well, what's this risk going to cost us? That's one of the most difficult elements in Agile, because part of the reason why you're doing this Agile is because you don't know necessarily about exactly which risk is going to come out. And this is one of the reasons why you often front load projects with the more risky work to get a handle on that, because then if you do find that all of your worst nightmares come to pass, then at least you've got only a limited sunk cost. To some extent, you can even abort the whole project if it looks like all the worst things have happened and it's not going to be cost effective. You know that up front, rather than investing everything, getting 3/4 of the way through the project on a waterfall basis, and then discovering that the risk you encountered was far worse than you'd allowed for and couldn't mitigate it. Risk, you still think about it, but it's how you address it that's a little bit different. So hopefully that's given a bit of an input and an insight. I think we actually had some risk questions that might have been answered in the separate presentation on Q&A from topic 2. So if you haven't already, have a look through that presentation or through the slides and see if there's a question in there that I might have given more elaboration on in that particular presentation. What else, Alex?
We had a few people asking for clarification on the community section. Who is involved under that umbrella? Is it the stakeholders or absolutely everybody in the process?
There's the two elements to the community. There is a stakeholder phase where the stakeholders get involved in the vision phase, and the stakeholders get involved in working out what needs to happen, and the stakeholders that have a vested interest make decisions about what are the constraints, what are the objectives, etc. Occasionally, you'll get different stakeholders commenting on the community, but usually the community decisions are driven by the person or the people responsible for those. So it'll be the project manager, definitely involved. It'll be your iteration manager, like your Scrum Master, or it'll be the product owner. That'll be the day-to-day or week-to-week interactive leaders that have the biggest say, generally, in who is in the community. So that's the big question about the community. Who's in, who's not? Who's on the team, who's out? And sometimes it's a foregone conclusion. Sometimes you have your team, and your team is the one that does stuff. And it's not a question of who's in or who's out. If your team gets the project, that's your team. You're already set. But occasionally it's not that simple, and the community then, the decisions about who's in and who's out is usually not going to be your executive manager that tells the project manager, look, I want Fred and Mary in this because, I like them, they're my kids and their kids play together, so I want you to make sure they're included. I mean, not saying that can't happen, but that's not generally the way those decisions get made. The team needs to make decisions for harmony, and it's up to the leadership skills of the project manager and the various leaders at that level to try to make sure that they put teams together that are going to work together. So that's where and how those decisions get made. So hopefully that brings a bit of clarity to that point.
Would you expect that over time an experienced Agile team would spend less time on the adapt phase in future?
I think that's a bit of a trap, to be honest. It depends. If they found the initial stages to be highly disorganized, communication flow was poor, and there was a lot of uncertainty and confusion in the early adapt phases, then yes, it would speed up. And sometimes it speeds up just due to familiarity. You get to know people and you don't second guess them, and the body language, it becomes clear, and the anecdotes and the emotional cues become obvious. And so for those reasons, it can speed up, mainly because you get to avoid the otherwise necessary steps of removing confusion and uncertainty. But once you've got past that hurdle, they don't usually continue to speed up. And if they do, sometimes that's a sign of them underdoing it. It can be a sign of overconfidence. It could be a sign of assumptive behavior. Look, we don't need to worry too much about how we did last time because we kind of know, right? We're all pretty clever and we've done this before, etc. So there's a risk there that if it does continue to get quicker and quicker, it'll possibly shift from being a proper process to a bit of lip service. So watch out for that. Once the harmony is there, it doesn't get any better than that. It's then a matter of how much adapting do you need to do, and it's then going to be a case-by-case, iteration by iteration, situation by situation, etc. It's going to be driven far more than that than it is on the team themselves. Next point, Alex.
I've lost it now. Sorry. Would you need separate Envision Vision data sheets for each release if you're working on a very large many-year project?
That would be a good idea. If you're going to have a release, you need an Envision statement for that release. So you need to know what your goalposts are. So the project manager who's responsible for meeting the objectives of the release, they need to know their success criteria for that release. They need to know what's in and what's out. And yeah, you may very well have a complete set of Envision documents and information and decisions pertaining to a release. And then you might do that again in a different context for a separate release that's going to be subsequent. That would be, I think, a clever idea and a good thing to do. And it really does depend on how big your releases are, etc. But certainly compartmentalizing those important milestones, very useful, because the end of a release is a very important milestone. Need to be clear on it. So, next point.
Of which of the 5 steps, envision, speculate, explore, adapt, etc., is the release plan an output?
It would be at the end of the envision phase. At the first release plan. At the end of the envision phase, you know what your release is going to be. So the envision phase, as we just discussed, I mean, you'd have an analysis and an envision phase for a release, and that release might be a year, for example. Let's work with that. And then you need a release plan for that year to say, okay, well, if this is all the things, all the capability we're going to put into this release, we now need a plan for what's going to go into which wave. We still haven't reached speculate because we haven't reached iteration planning yet. So you've got a release plan that's at the per wave level. Then you pick the first wave, wave 1, and say, right, well, in this wave, we've decided that this, and this capability needs to be achieved. So then you get to the speculate phase and say, what are we going to do in the first 2 weeks? What's going to happen there? So yeah, you need your release plan. And mind you, this is not like, this is a release plan that's never set in stone. A release plan, like anything, it's going to evolve and adapt and modify. It's not going to change necessarily a great deal of what goes into the release at the end. It might change a bit of that. It might often change the order. You might get through the end of wave 1 and decide that what you'd planned to do in wave 2, not necessarily a great idea anymore. You've got some new ideas and you're going to change that. Great, you can do that. We're Agile. But you definitely want to be going into your first iteration with a release plan that looks further ahead than that.
How do you know that you have enough for a wave?
The people that are going to make that decision are the key people out of your development team, because knowing what's going to go into a wave is not just a case of the project manager saying, well, it'd be really cool if we had all this functionality at the end of the first wave. I mean, you know, I could build heaps for that and it'd be really good. That just may be unrealistic. There has to be a contribution to that decision from appropriate expertise in the development team. So how do you know when you've got enough to fill in a wave? Well, it's going to be a combination of prioritization, that is sequencing. What stuff should you do first? That's going to have risk management components that we just talked about. That's going to have capability components that we just talked about. And that's going to have practicality components where, for example, your project manager might have what they think is going to be a great wave 1 and stuff that's going to go in it. And your development representatives turn around and say, no, we can't do that until we've done this, or that's just too much work. You've got no idea how much work that is. That's just crazy. So how do you know when you've got enough? When everyone agrees that you've got enough. And this is why it is a negotiated process. And if you don't have it sufficiently negotiated and sufficient input, you get unrealistic expectations. You don't usually get people running out of things to do. But if you do, that's the easiest problem to solve, because you just pull something forward. If you get to the final iteration of a wave and you've ticked all your boxes and you've got it all done, you bring something forward. That's pretty easy. It's the other way around where it gets pretty hard. And that's usually because not enough input was taken from the technical development team, and the reality checks were too few and far between. Let's do some more, Alex. We've still got a bit more time.
All right, great. If your project is in software development, would you do software testing in each story?
It depends. Well, generally, yes, is my experience. You generally would, because you need to be satisfied that the story works. And if the story, and in this context, let's call them a feature, if the feature doesn't work, it's not finished. So you need to test sufficiently to know that you can draw a line under it and say, yeah, that feature works, I've finished it. Because until then, you haven't. And so that means that you need a appropriate testing practice that helps you ensure that what you put out at the end of a iteration is working software. And this is a really key point. It's got to be working software, not buggy software. Not that they say that there's no bugs, but it's got to be working to a point where you can sit it down and show the customer and say, see, if you click here and click here and click, you get this. And then they smile and giggle and happy, and or they say, well, what if it did that? That would be even better. So you need to have it accessible, and that means what you don't want is them to be saying to you, well, that'd be great, except this is a bug and that's a bug and this. But it's not about bug discussions. Your iteration, your adapt phase, your feedback loop is not about them telling you what you know you've already messed up. That's a complete waste of their time and a complete embarrassment. It's delivering working software that they can test the functionality, capability, the value that's accumulated in that. And you need testing appropriate to ensure that. And that testing is going to be driven by the quality standards that's required at the end of the day. So which can depend on the industry you're serving and what kind of software you're doing and who it's going to, etc. So hopefully that helps answer that question a little bit.
Yeah. With waterfall projects, at the end of the project, you have documentation like business requirement statements and functional requirements, technical design documents. Is there equivalent documentation that's produced from an Agile project, either at the end or at the end of iterations and phases?
There is certainly, well, no, there's not, the equivalence is not really there to the same extent, because a waterfall project relies heavily on its documentation to contribute to the decisions. Agile relies a lot more on the interactions. So that's not to say that we don't document those interactions. Obviously, if you have an iteration, you have an adapt phase, and you have an iteration, and you have a product owner or a customer, and you sit down and you go through it, and you get some feedback, etc. Yeah, you document what you need to document to record it. You want the accuracy and the integrity of that information preserved and protected, so you document it in the appropriate way. But you document for that purpose. You document to ensure the usefulness and the integrity of that information to serve its purpose. That's what the documentation is all for. It's very different in a waterfall thing where you document for the sake of documentation, for the sake of procedure, for the sake of process. But you do have some things that are conceptually similar. Like, for example, at the very end of the project, you do have the retrospection, where you look back and you say, well, how do we do this? Did we do this badly? We did this poorly. We got these iterations horribly wrong because we grossly underestimated what it was going to take, and we badly underestimated this risk. And you have those sorts of retrospective discussions, and you take lessons away from them, etc. But the reporting that says, well, here's your 150-page document of how this project went, is generally not the same, and is generally nowhere near as informative, because what happens is that if you have a release that has 4 waves in it, and it's got umpteen iterations, the reporting of what exactly happened at the early iterations has greatly diminished importance, because that's all got rolled into the future decisions, got rolled in the next decisions, got rolled in the next wave, the next iteration, and it's what happens at the end that is most important. So reporting on the very early stages is mostly useful at those early stages. Reporting at the end for the entirety of the project is not quite the same, because in a plan, you needed to go to plan for the entire plan. And if it deviates from the plan at any point, that's relevant. But if it deviates from the plan at the beginning in Agile, that's not really relevant at the end. So it's more about what it needs to do for its purpose, and it's more about where you finish that matters than where you start. So yeah, you need a report that says, this is what we built, this is the value we've created, and yeah, it's worth looking at a deviation that says, this is what we thought we were going to build at the beginning, and this is what we built in the end, and that's so much better. So that kind of comparison is useful, because that helps define and describe the benefits of using an Agile approach, because it says, well, if you just gone and built what you thought you needed, you would have built something that you didn't need, or perhaps less so. So those sort of things are still useful, but it's not the same regime when it comes to reporting and documentation. 3 more. Alex, we've got time for 3 more.
Great. What are the important metrics that need to be tracked as part of an Agile project in order to measure the quality of the delivered product?
This is going to be covered under practices based on the technical requirements of whatever it is you're doing. So the metrics, metrics is a fairly generic term, but metrics might be applying to quality. For example, how suitable, how much quality is it, to what standard is it being produced. There will be practices that say that, well, this is what standard we have to produce to. This is how we test to ensure that we're meeting that standard. This is what we do when we're not meeting that standard. This is how we handle it. This is what we do about it. So there'll be practices in place that handle what information you need, what decisions that feeds into, and what you do about it and make use of those decisions. So metrics only exist in Agile insofar as they support a decision. And this is a little bit different from sandstorm reporting that occurs in waterfall, because you just report on everything and all the information's there, and if you feel like digging for it, you can find it. But in Agile, you only report on things when a decision, you are aware of a decision that needs to leverage that information. So metrics only really come into play if you already know what decisions you're going to make with the use of those metrics. And then once you know that, then you know exactly what level of information gathering you need. You know what level of accuracy and what level of timeliness you need for that information. But then you only gather what you need and use that to make the decisions that you make. So the idea of sending weekly or whatever reports to the project manager that the project manager never reads or just reads the first page, etc., that doesn't happen in Agile, or it shouldn't. It should be the other way around, where the project manager says, right, I need to make these, and these decisions at the end of this period. I'll need this kind of information. Can you supply that? Well, yeah, you can. That's how you would go about it a little bit differently. And I'm not sure if that's exactly what you meant by metrics in that regard, but if it's not, let us know, and we'll elaborate it in the subsequent presentation. So two more, Alex.
Alrighty. What are the must-have roles in an Agile team?
Absolute must-have roles. Well, the first obvious one is the project manager. Now, to be clear, the project manager is responsible for the entirety of the project and its strategic outcomes. So when you've got a vision, the project manager is ultimately responsible for achieving that vision or a variation of it, and I mean an approved variation on that vision. That is, if the customer changes their mind incrementally along the way, and that has been done with appropriate processes, then you have a varied vision by the end of it, and that's great. So if it's all done by appropriate methods and by agreement and buy-in, then that's the entire life cycle. That's the project manager's job, and the project manager's job interfaces back up with the executive and the decision makers and the money spenders. The other function you really need, and I would say the next most important, product ownership, product manager, the person who is representing the customer's requirements. So you remember this vision statement? That was initially derived from a lot of waffle from the customer that says, yeah, it'd be really good if it could do this, 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 and these other 150,000 things. Well, someone's got to represent that and be accountable for the appropriateness and depth of feedback that occurs at every iteration. If you're not providing appropriate feedback at every iteration, you're not Agile. So fundamentally, if you don't have that representative in place to make sure that the appropriate dialogue and feedback is happening, then you're really going to struggle. And for example, doing things like making sure that customer feedback is not just bug reports, as I mentioned in an example before, because that's not Agile. That's not leveraging the benefits of Agile. It's about making sure that the customer doesn't slacken off and stop turning up to the meetings or stop giving you feedback and just, assuming you're doing the right job. Someone's got to be in charge of that. The third one is the activity manager, best known as the Scrum Master from the Scrum methodology. That is the person who is ensuring that planning takes place on an incremental and regular basis. So they are responsible for every iteration. They sit down with the team and they make sure that the plan is done, it is sensible, it is fulfilled, and they are the ones that clear the obstacles. So when someone in the team has a problem and they're at risk of not completing what they had committed to, and there's some way that that can be solved, that's the Scrum Master's job. Get in there and fix it, find out. And sometimes that means juggling workload, tossing balls from one person to the next. It means getting other things out. It means getting on the phone and badgering someone to fix something. Could be anything. But the Scrum Master is responsible for momentum of value per iteration. Now, after those three roles, things get a little more vague, and you can even start to double up with some of the other roles. And you could look at a few methodologies, and you could say that this methodology says you've got this role, and this one's got this role. But it then really depends a lot more on the specifics of what you're doing. But unless you have those three roles working together as a good team, then it's hard to describe what you're doing as appropriately Agile. What have we got left? One more, is that right?
Oh, that's right. It's a bit of a broad one. Where does change management fit into the Agile methodology?
I think I'll take the question as being, as you said, a broad question. I mean, the broad principle of change management. The best way to talk about this is to go right back to what we said at the very beginning of the webinar tonight. We talked about change management as being the true purpose of projects. And if you look at it at that really high level, I mean, I've seen projects of all kinds, of all different methodologies, delivered and implemented with a really poor or woeful lip service paid to the concepts and wider concept of change management. And I'm sure many of you would have encountered very similar problems. And this is where businesses and organizations lose sight of the fact that the project is just a tool, and it's just one tool that brings about change. But it's not the only tool. Projects change things. They don't change people. And changing people, that is the users, the customers, the benefactors, or the victims of change, they need a whole different set of processes. And whether you're using Agile or Waterfall or anything else in terms of delivering the actual functional, practical change, you still need to change the people. So you still need ways in which you can encompass the broader scope of psychological change, cultural change, and all those sorts of elements that might need to be used regardless of Agile. So in a sense, you could say that all of that stuff absolutely just as required. How does it work differently with Agile? Well, sometimes change management is about expectation management. And when I say sometimes, usually, it's about expectation management. And it's about clearly outlining the expectations of what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen. Now, if you have an Agile project, that can sometimes be a little harder. It can be a little more difficult to sell the story of how the change is going to be good and wonderful if you're not too sure exactly what that change is going to be yet. So that can be a little bit challenging. But what you can do is you can sometimes turn that around and say that the reason we're doing an Agile is because if we follow a script, we might get to a disaster. We are going to be Agile because that is the best way to incorporate your feedback. You, the victim, you get to tell us and give us feedback. I mean, not everyone will, of course, but the concept is there to say that Agile can be the best method because there's some uncertainties and we need to deal with those by making sure that we have a feedback loop in place. And, you know, usually when you tell people that are not used to getting that kind of input into the unraveling of a project, there's usually some positives that can be drawn out of that. So there's usually ways in which the potential negatives or difficulties of linking Agile with traditional change management principles can actually be used to your advantage in some situations. But it really does depend on the nature of the people you're dealing with, the culture of the organization, etc. And, you know, this is why change managers, in my opinion, truly capable change managers are worth their weight in gold. And, I mean, this is going to sound a little bit contentious for people sitting here on a project management course, but in my view, for most organizational change, the change manager is a more important person than the project manager in terms of long-term success for the change to the organization. So that's why I think it's a bit of a unloved science of change management. All right, well, we need to wrap up because we've hit 8 o'clock and we've already gone half an hour over. We have to stop at some point. But rest assured, we will be discussing any unanswered questions. We're going to go through them in the next couple of days, make sure that anything that we haven't answered tonight or last week, we'll pluck out. We'll do just what we've done before. We'll give a direct presentation. We'll queue it up with the slides, with the questions on the slides. So what you can do, if you're only interested in a couple of questions, grab the slides, pull them down, look at where in the list your slides are, and then you can scroll through the video, and until that question appears on the screen, and roughly there, you'll be hearing my answer. So hopefully that'll help you just get to the key information that you're looking for. So we need to wrap up tonight. I want to thank everyone for joining in. Thank you for all your fantastic questions and support. Thanks for all the interest and involvement. I'm looking forward to catching up with at least some of you, I suspect, in the upcoming MOOC in the next few weeks. As I said, find that link on the website, on the portal. You'll be able to register. You didn't need to register separately, although I dare say you might get an email at some point from the marketing department to let you know about it because they do that kind of stuff. So, yeah, you'll probably catch that as well. In the meantime, thanks very much for all your support, assistance, and encouragement. And keep an eye out for the information on the test, and I look forward to catching up with all of you again at a MOOC sometime in the future. Thank you, and good night.